It's no secret that New York City isn't exactly safe from the effects of climate change. It's a relatively small island packed with hundreds of thousands of buildings, millions of people, and seemingly endless feats of engineering. During heavy rainfall, subway stations and streets frequently fill with water, evidence that the city's infrastructure isn't prepared for what's to come, and it's only going to get worse. And this tiny tip of Manhattan is particularly vulnerable. Now, officials are racing to come up with solutions for the future. Their latest idea? A multi-million-dollar project that consists of building a seawall, flood barriers, and elevating an entire park in Lower Manhattan. But to save the neighbourhood, some of it first has to be destroyed. Take a walk down the west side of Manhattan and you'll eventually pass through Battery Park City, a lush 92-acre community on the southernmost tip of the island. Once home to the Docklands, this area was officially established in the 1960s through land reclamation. By using the excavation material from the World Trade Center construction site being built at the time, workers extended the shoreline into the Hudson River. Today, Battery Park is considered a successful urban renewal project with ample green space, residential buildings, and restaurants. But while the neighbourhood has exploded in popularity, the future isn't as hopeful. In 2012, Hurricane Sandy hit New York, causing an unprecedented amount of flooding across the entire city.
Lower Manhattan remains eerily dark and partially underwater.
Homes and critical infrastructure were left destroyed, and millions went without power for days. In the end, the city was left with about $19 billion in damage. Lower Manhattan saw some of the worst devastation and flooding, including parts of Battery Park City. But this won't be the last of it. As the effects of climate change threaten to generate more intense storms and flooding, the city's infrastructure is not exactly prepared for what's to come. According to the National Ocean Service, sea levels are set to rise roughly a foot or a quarter of a metre by 2050. During future storms, water could rise to roughly 5 to 7 metres in the Battery Park area. While it may not be noticeable day to day, if we want to combat climate change, it's vital that we build our infrastructure in ways to protect our cities. Seawalls, trees, and even floating cities are just some of the ideas that engineers around the world are coming up with. Here in Battery Park City, there's at least a $220 million plan on the table. That'll protect key areas on the tip of Manhattan, including Wagner Park, 3.5 acres of green space along the waterfront. The park is going to be demolished and raised from just 3 metres above sea level to 6. At the centre of the whole project is this massive new flood wall. Parts of it are going to be buried under the park, while other sections are going to be exposed or topped with glass. Unlike a traditional seawall that would divide the area, the buried wall will allow visitors to access more green space. The exposed section will feature flip-up gates that will lie flat when not in use. And it'll expand to the north towards Tribeca with an additional flood barrier system spanning along the waterfront. The project also includes enhanced drainage with the installation of isolation valves and a tide gate. Over at Pier A Plaza, the area's lowest points, a bi-level landscaped area with tiered seating is going to act as a barrier to incoming waters. Wood seating will allow it to remain submerged for longer periods of time. Workers will also plant trees and build concrete structures resistant to saltwater. It'll all help protect the neighbourhoods and the surrounding areas from rising sea levels, storm surges and flooding, specifically during rare 100-year storm events. That could save the city lives, money and properties in the next storm. It all sounds promising, but not everyone's on board with the idea, especially down at Wagner Park. Local advocates have pushed back against these changes for years because they'll reduce green space by 10%, and green space is not exactly widespread in New York City. In response, authorities have made several changes to the plans, but to many it's still not enough. And they've proposed alternatives like a larger flood wall and flood-proofing existing structures. Still, officials say the elevation is vital for protecting against future storms that could very well threaten to destroy the park. In a city of over 8 million people, it's perhaps no surprise that so many want to have a voice on future changes, especially when the impact of climate change is now really making itself felt. Saving Battery Park is just one part of a larger plan to fight climate change across this city. Eventually, these projects will connect as part of the Lower Manhattan Coastal Resiliency Project along the East River waterfront. This includes more flood barriers and the reconstruction of East River Park. As sea levels continue to rise and as flooding gets more intense, it's important for authorities to get plans like this right the first time, or risk causing irreversible damage to their cities. You can learn more about New York's flood defense plans and other topics on our channel over on the World's Best Construction Podcast, available right now wherever you get your podcasts. And as always, if you enjoyed this video and you want to learn more about where construction is headed, make sure you're subscribed to tomorrow's build.